So, yes, I am at Houston Christian University, used to be called Houston Baptist. I live in Houston, Texas. And yesterday, I had a Republican day. I did, because I got in the airport at Bush Airport and I got off the plane at Reagan Airport. Okay, so it was actually a Republican day. And as I was in the plane flying from Houston up here, well, to Virginia, I guess not, no, it was DC. I was reminded of a story I read once of a New York businessman who had to fly down to Houston for a business trip. Now, this man was a newlywed. He'd only been married 6 months, and this was the first time he was separated from his wife since their wedding. And he missed her dearly. And so the moment he got to his Houston hotel room, he whipped out his phone and sent her an email. Unfortunately, in his haste, he typed in the wrong email address. And so rather than go to his wife in Manhattan, it went to an 85-year-old woman in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, this woman had been married for 60 years, and just the night before, her husband had passed away in his sleep. But she was doing well. She had support in her community. But that night, the woman disappeared. They searched up and down, in and out. They couldn't find her. They were starting to get nervous when one of the grandkids remembered that grandma knew how to use her email. And so they went to the study, and they opened the door, and they found the poor woman passed out in front of her computer. And nobody could understand why. She seemed to be doing so well. And then someone thought to look at the computer screen. And this is what it said. "To my dearest wife, I have arrived safely. I am awaiting your arrival next week. P.S. I suggest you bring shorts because it's awfully hot down there. So watch out who you send those emails to. It could be dangerous." I am so excited to be here, but I'm also a little bit unexcited because I have been suffering to death in Houston. It has been the worst tree pollen in the last 10 years. And just last week, I spoke at Regent College in Norfolk, Virginia, 2 hours from here. And the pollen was worse there than Houston. And now I'm here, and the pollen is worse. So I'm going to try to get through here. I want to tell you, if you notice me choking and coughing, I promise you, it is completely allergies. So I am miserable, but I am not contagious. So you can shake my hand, okay? So I'm not contagious, but I'm getting there, slowly moving along. All right. I want to talk about Plato. Most of you have read or know about the Republic, and you know that his ideal republic is broken into 3 classes. There are the craftsmen, the artisans, the workers. Then there are what he calls the auxiliaries, the soldiers, the people that, not the guardians, but the people that defend. And then the rulers are called the guardians. But the top guardians, we all remember this, are the philosopher kings. And most of you know that Woody Allen said that Socrates could have got a lot farther with philosopher kings if every time he said that, he didn't go like this and look at himself, okay? But now, I remember, and many of you have probably thought, that is ridiculous, okay? That ideal republic could never exist anywhere. It's just a bunch of, idealism and, up in the air. Guess what? It isn't idealistic, because for much of the Middle Ages, much of the Catholic Middle Ages, known as Christendom, that's what it was. You had those who work, you had those who fight, and you had those who pray. Who were the leaders in the High Middle Ages? Yes, there was what you call a Holy Roman Emperor. There were princes, but the people that really ran society, the people that were looked up to as the leaders, were not so much the princes and warriors. They were the priests, the bishop, the monks, the nuns, the friars. What I'm saying is, in the Middle Ages, for a long time, people looked up to those who had dedicated their life to meditation and contemplation and prayer. So really, Europe was actually led in many ways by philosopher kings for almost 1,000 years. But it's hard for us to access that. Whether we are Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox, if we're Americans, it's hard for us to access it because we're still living in an Enlightenment world where all of our media, all of our public schools, all of our universities have demonized the Middle Ages, teaching us to look down upon them as backward, dark, ignorant, superstitious, and, well, medieval. Everything that word seems to mean to us, right? What's going on here? We have a hard time accessing their wisdom. And I'll tell you why, because especially as Americans, when we look up to people and rank them as role models, we still look to those with wealth, those who are rich, those who are celebrities. I like people with talent. Well, if they got talent, but they're not celebrities, we don't care about them, right? Back then, they looked up to people that had wisdom, not knowledge, okay? We worship people who are specialists. And look, I have a lot of respect for rocket scientists and brain surgeons, okay? But that's not what anybody in the Middle Ages referred to as wisdom. That was knowledge, but it was specialized knowledge. Wisdom is what comes with age and experience. Wisdom, true wisdom, always goes together with virtue. But we have a hard time looking up to those who privilege wisdom because we're so focused on money and everything else. And there was a guy named Perry Miller who wrote about the Puritans, and I don't think he actually understood Calvinism at all, but he taught us that the Calvinists never knew whether they were saved, so they figured if God prospered them monetarily, it meant they were saved. That's just somebody that doesn't understand Reformed theology. But that's what everybody is taught. Everybody is still taught that. But what happens is we look to those who are successful rather than to those who are deep, to those. Now, I think anybody in this room would guess that Plato would privilege the life of contemplation over the life of action. But you might be surprised to find, as I did when I wrote From Aristotle to Christ, that Aristotle agreed with Plato, right? We've always got that image of Plato up there, Aristotle back to earth. Well, there's some truth to that. But Aristotle still said the life of contemplation was superior to the life of action. Even the great Os Guinness doesn't know what to do with that. He's still a real favorite. He writes a lot about action, man. What are the people hanging out in monasteries doing nothing? Okay, even him, and he's one of the wisest people we have. So, and he's not even American, but he's been here long enough that he's an American. And what I'm getting at is that people respected and looked up to those that sought the life of contemplation, of silence, of meditation, of growing, not just in knowledge, but in wisdom. In Plato's Republic, the kings have to be philosophers because the most important thing a king does is judge. And you cannot judge unless you know the absolute standard. Otherwise, everything's going to change all the time, right? So we need to get back to this understanding of the ultimate is the search after wisdom rather than just knowledge. Knowledge is not bad, but if it doesn't bring wisdom and a holistic understanding of experience, it's not the same thing as wisdom. See, these folks in the Middle Ages, they yearned after things that I think were so much richer than us. I think the things we yearn after are so often kind of banal. My kids grew up watching the Disney Channel, and it was actually the golden age of the Disney Channel, and it wasn't exactly bad, okay? Some of it was funny, like The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and the Wizards. Some of it was actually pretty funny and even fairly family-oriented. But I remember at first I was excited because Disney Channel, they were always saying, follow your dream. And at first, that's wonderful. I want my kids to seek after the life of the imagination. And then I realized that what Disney meant by follow your dream is you could be a pop star for 5 minutes too. Hey, okay, no, that's not what we're seeking after. We're seeking after something fuller and richer. How many of you look up as your role model to Reepicheep? Anybody know who Reepicheep is? Right? He appears both in Prince Caspian and Voyage of the Dawn. Actually, we see him briefly in Last Battle, but he's really in those two books. And in Prince Caspian, he's more of a sort of Sir Gawain figure fighting everybody.
But when we get to Dawn Treader, he's more of a Galahad, right? He's more of a spiritual seeker. And you might remember near the end of the book, right? They're trying to get to the far eastern sea. And you'll remember, if you've read it, that Reepicheep hopes that he can sail to Aslan's country, which is ultimately heaven, right? And as they're sailing far east to where the sun rises, they ask what they're going to do. And Reepicheep said, I don't know what you're going to do. But as for me, my plans are made. As long as I can, I will sail east in the Dawn Treader. If she sinks, I will paddle east in my canoe. If she sinks, then I will swim east with my 4 paws. And if I have not reached Aslan's country or gone over the edge of the world in a vast waterfall, I shall sink with my nose to the east, and Peepakee will become the king of the talking animals in Narnia. Do you remember that? I can't read that passage without tears coming to my eyes, okay? That is what it really means to seek after the good, the true, and the beautiful, to grow and grow in wisdom, to become the person that God created you to be. And so often our goals are just short-sighted. They're not about, look, how many of you have ever read The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis? Not only C.S. Lewis's best sermon, one of the best sermons ever written in the last 2,000 years. And near the end of that great essay, Lewis says of us, we are such poor, half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. We're like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by an offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Now, Lewis is not preaching what we today call success in life gospel. That's not what he means. The full life is not, big house, big car. No. He's talking about a life that is rich with purpose, with meaning, with joy, with a fullness of God's love and God's Spirit. That's what he's talking about. And that's what the Middle Ages at its best is seeking. It's much better than that, right? I mean, look, Plato, and that's my focus today. Plato is talking about how we come out of the cave into the truth, and we are seeking to grow and grow closer to the forms, the ideas. Try to get a vision of what is truly true and really real. Francis Schaeffer used to like to say that. Truly true and really real. That's what we're seeking. That which does not change. That which is perfect, that which illuminates everything else. But guess what, folks? As great as Plato's goal is, ours as Christians is so much better. Because the end point of Plato is impersonal forms that are abstract and just, they don't have any body. They're just ideas. That's cool. But that's not what awaits us. What awaits us is participation in the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, eternal love between all members of the Trinity. That is cool. And guess what that is? It's what this whole conference is about, the beatific vision. Now, folks, I used to always think that the word beatific came from the word beautiful. And the beatific vision is indeed beautiful, but that is not the etymology of the word. Beauty comes from a word that means fair and good and attractive. Beatific comes from Matthew 5. Isn't it wonderful? We got a Matthew up there talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount begins with, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs shall be the kingdom of God, right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, right? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And most importantly, and it was up there earlier today, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And folks, if you read the early church fathers, especially the Eastern church fathers, they're always quoting, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Because you cannot, Gregory of Nazianzus says, don't be a theologian if you're not seeking purity, okay? You can be as smart as you want. You need to have purity and purity of heart. Now, the word in Greek for blessed is makarios. And that's the same word that's used. Remember when Jesus says to to Thomas, doubting Thomas, blessed are you, right? I'm sorry, you believe because you see, but blessed or happy are those who believe without seeing. Well, makarios in Greek becomes beatitudo in Latin. And that's why they're called the Beatitudes, the blesseds, right? So the beatific vision is the blessed vision. We are moving into beatitude. Now, ultimately, it's beautiful because we are going to look upon the face, so to speak, of the one who made the beauty of the cosmos. Okay, so it is a beautiful vision. But the root, the etymological root, is it is a blessed vision. Now, this is wonderful, right? And even though a lot of us in this room, I'm just interested, how many of you in this room are converts to Catholicism? We have a few? No, maybe not. How many are converts to Orthodoxy? That's a pretty Protestant crowd. Okay, I'll remember that. I was surprised. Again, as Americans, there is an aspect, and especially Protestants then, there's an aspect of the beatific vision that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. Let me read what St. Thomas Aquinas says about it in his Summa Theologica. I'm sorry, you were supposed to have an outline, but I guess he got lost in cyberspace. Maybe they'll send it to you later. Okay, this is what he says about the beatific vision. The intellect, which has more of the light of glory, will see God the more perfectly, and he will have a fuller participation of the light of glory who has more charity, caritas, agape. Because where there is the greater agape, there is the more desire. And desire, in a certain degree, makes the one desiring apt and prepared to receive the object desired. Hence, he who possesses the more agape will see God the more perfectly and will be the more beatified. So the more caritas, agape, the more love you have, the more desire you will have, the more light of glory you will have, and therefore you will have more of God in the beatific vision. Matthew touched on it a little bit by saying all of that purity makes you more apt to receive the glory of God. Now, I hope that's common sense, but not for an American, okay? As Americans, I don't care how conservative you are. We have been influenced by, I hate to say it, but the heresy of egalitarianism and the heresy of inclusivism, okay? We are not all the same, okay? And even though I can define, diversity, and I can give you inclusivism in a good meaning, just throw out the word equity, because the word equity, I'm sorry, is evil, okay? We are supposed to be equal, because we all have equal value and worth in the eyes of God. We could be an autistic child. We could be a person that's in a coma. Doesn't make a difference. In God's image, Imago Dei, we have equality. Also, thank God we live in a country where we have equality before the law. But any other kind of equality ends up being anti-humanistic, okay? We are not the same. We were not meant to be the same. Let me show you how things have changed. When I was a college student, or maybe a high school student, you would call a man a sexist if he treated men and women exactly the same. That's a sexist who has no sympathy for women and how they're different and treats them like another guys. Today, you're considered a sexist if you don't treat men and women exactly the same. So basically, we've lost our minds, okay? We basically lost our minds. We don't understand any difference. Now, I understand that, especially down south during segregation, they called it separate but equal. Well, it was separate, but it wasn't equal. So I understand, but that's not the way it works, okay? God made us unique. God loves unique. As one of the few French phrases I actually use, vive la différence, okay? God made us to be different. We don't all belong on the same rung of the ladder, but it makes us uncomfortable. Now, I am a C.S. Lewis scholar, and one of the greatest things about that is it means I have spoken and published with every denomination. That's what everybody loves C.S. Lewis. If you want to open up a Calvinist, just say, C.S. Lewis, oh, must be true, okay? It's amazing you can do it. You can even get a Mormon to listen to you. That is the one real theologian that they read there because they misunderstand Lewis's theosis, but whatever. It is a way in, okay? People love C.S. Lewis, okay. Now, it took me a while to notice this. at least 3 or 4 years ago. I am a pretty conservative, traditional writer, so I tend to say St. Augustine and St. Paul. But I noticed that whenever I was publishing in an Anglican, Catholic, whatever publication, they kept it. But whenever it was an evangelical publication, they silently changed St. Paul to Paul of Tarsus or the Apostle Paul, and they changed St. Augustine to Augustine of Hippo. Now, why did they do that? Okay, folks, look, I'm a Baptist. I understand, yes, the Bible says we are all saints. But I'm sorry, that's not the real reason that we're bothered by that. You know why we're bothered that? Oh, you think you're holier than I am, huh? That's it. I'm sorry. But envy, the most destructive force in a democracy, is what's causing that, okay? Remember the second half of the Decalogue? Everybody can understand, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie. But what about number 10? Don't covet? How am I hurting you if I'm coveting your wife or your house? Isn't that a victimless crime? Well, not to God. Coveting, by the way, is another word for envy, okay? And a lot of us, we don't want to put it in words, okay? But we are jealous. That's one of the reasons we're against people speaking in tongues. Not because we really think it's wrong. I don't care how many Bible verses you quote. It's because, well, God didn't give that to me, so it must not be real, okay? We've got to be able to evaluate and contemplate and see our motives for things. Folks, God, there are people that are more spiritual than us, okay? We have no problem saying that there are people that are more athletic than you or more musical than you. Now, yeah, you're probably not going to be a great athlete or a great musician unless you have some native skill. But if you don't practice, you're not going to be at the top. You're not even going to be near the top, okay? Look, our view, I don't know what it is, okay? There are people that are more saintly than we are. There are Baptists, we at least understand prayer warriors. And by the way, don't believe it when people tell you that we don't have saints. We do have saints. We call them Wycliffe Bible translators. And we looked up to them more than any saints in the Catholic Church, okay? So we understand that, okay? We understand, but we have to get away from this. I mean, look, if your city symphony did their symphony on the basis of egalitarian methods by allowing some kind of pool to who will get to sit in the orchestra, would you pay money for those season tickets? I don't think so. If your state or your city had a football league in which they pick people random, actually, that's not a good example because we have the Houston Texans. So I think that's actually, I'm sorry, but I think, and by the way, if you think the Texans are bad, you should go have your history lesson and look up the Houston Oilers. Oh, man. Oh, that's pathos, man. That's pathos. Okay. Anyway, I've been in Houston long enough to do that. Anyway, so folks, we got to get that out of our mind, okay? We're not all the same. Some people spend more time in prayer and are closer to God. That's not works righteousness. That is just more sanctified, moving more. We understand it in every other area of life. But somehow when it comes to spirituality, we get a little bit bent out of shape. Folks, we're not all meant to be on the same rung of the... Let me give you an example. Let's say that Matthew and I were both awarded next year a 2-week all-expense-paid trip to Rome. It's been given to us as pure grace, and we're going. But let's say for the next year, Matthew doesn't even think about it. But for the next year, I get out all the books, I study about Rome, I look up all the museums, I get everything. When we go, by pure grace, to Rome, who's going to get more out of it? I'm going to get more out of it because I have made my mind more apt to receive the glory of it. That's not works righteousness. That's just the way life works, okay, folks? So we have to understand that the beatific vision is hierarchical. Oh, big word, okay? People are scared of that, okay? You guys are from all over the place. How many of you have been to what's called a Renaissance festival? You have that? Like they're all over. One of the best ones is in Houston. It's really beautiful. You're going to get a chance up in North Houston. And it's really funny, folks, but I used to take my kids there every year. We closed their eyes when the girl came by with the chainmail bra, but it was still good. And I love those things. They're just wonderful. By the way, in case you're one of these people that was like, why is it called the Renaissance Festival, but everybody's dressed medieval? Well, I'm going to tell you in case that bothers you, because those are the things that bother me. the whole concept of the Renaissance Festival, it is the court of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon before the divorce and before he broke with the Catholic Church. And if you know anything about Henry VIII, he loved the Middle Ages and was actually an accomplished jouster. That's why he hurt himself and had that suppurating wound. Horrible. But that's what it is, that his court, when everybody loved playing medieval. Okay, they were really into that. He loved King Arthur and all that sort of stuff. So I took my kids there every year. And after about the 5th year, I had one of those aha moments. A light bulb burned off all my hair. It's all the light bulbs, really. That's what. I used to have a full head of hair, boom. And I realized, and some of you might have, did you ever look around at the other people with you? The other people at a Renfest? You will discover that 80% of those people will disagree with you about everything. Politics, family, sexuality, everything. Then what the heck are they doing here? These are people who would hate everything the Middle Ages stands for, but they're there. Is it true? I think they're there because they recognize a sort of ugliness in the modern world, an ugliness that has to do with the breaking down of hierarchy and the deconstruction of the sexes. One thing about the Renaissance, you could tell who the boys and girls are, okay? The boys even wear cod pieces, folks, okay? This is like serious stuff, okay? So it's, I think, instinct. You know what C.S. Lewis said? He always had something to say. He said, when we stop looking up to princes and monarchs and kings, you know what happens? We start idolizing English words. We start idolizing footballers and music stars, right? That's what we do because we want to look up because we're made that way. So let's at least have respect for somebody. That's why, folks, I mean, I remember talking about George W. Bush. At first, I foolishly believed that we could set up democracies in the Middle East. That would be that, but it doesn't work that way, okay? Because all they do is they vote, and they vote in a tyrant, okay? I personally think, and I've studied history all my life, is that the best thing for the Muslim Middle East is a king. Because at least if you have a king, the person has been raised to have some sense of noblesse oblige. And if you don't have a king, you're going to have a warlord who couldn't care less and just conquers everything. So you're better off with a king, and maybe we need a king. I don't know. What is it? You missed me yet? What is the Hamilton? You missed me yet? I don't know. He does that la-di-la-di-da. I can't do it. I'm sure you girls can do it. Jordan, you think you missed me yet? You missed me yet? Okay. Anyway, so, you know, I'm sorry. I hope this is a conservative crowd because I told people that, you know, I am so glad that the founding fathers did what they did, but I feel pretty sure that if I lived back then, I would have been a royalist. I'm sorry. But really, what did the British do to us? I'm sorry, but Biden did a whole lot worse things than George III. Let me put that out there, okay? So it's just like I feel. I'm a Protestant. I'm glad Luther did what he did. But if I lived back then, you know who I would have been? I would have been Erasmus. Let's just be really, really honest. Erasmus said the most beautiful, practical thing ever spoken. Erasmus said, I would like to believe I'm willing to die for Jesus Christ. I know I'm not willing to die for Martin Luther. So that would have been, so anyway, I'm glad they did it, okay? But come on, folks. Okay, so look, any Dante fans here? Okay, how many of you have made it to paradise, though? You didn't stop it in for very good. Okay, in paradise, it is also hierarchical. Like they're all there. Well, they're all there in what's called the mystic rows, but they also manifest themselves in the spheres, the planetary spheres. And the first and lowest sphere is the moon. And that's where he meets Picarda, who is a nun who broke her vow. And so she is in a lower, she's in heaven, but she's in a lower realm than the other people. And Dante says, Picarda, don't you wish that you were higher? And she says, no. The power of this place is that our will is in Christ's will, and Christ's will is in us, and all we want is what he wants and where he wants us. Okay? Let me borrow this over here. This is big. Okay. Let me show you something. Okay. Where'd I put there it is. Okay. Yeah, yours is bigger than mine. Oh man. That's not one of those. What is the women? Oh yeah, Stanley, there it is. Yeah. My son's fiance got him a Stanley. I think he was a little bit, embarrassed because it's all girls, but he got it. He kept saying, my girlfriend gave it to me. But anyway, okay. Now I want you to understand why Picarda can be fully happy there and everybody that's higher can be happy. Okay. So we got, I don't know what this is. Let's say this is 16 ounces and let's say this is 24 ounces. Okay. Let's say I hold up these two water bottles. This is 16 ounces and I fill it with 16 ounces of water. And then I take this 24-ounce Stanley and I fill it with 24 ounces. Now, here's the question. Which bottle is more full? Oh, they're equally full, okay? Each of them is holding as much water as, you can tell it from New Jersey when I said that, holding as much water as they can. I used to be teased by one of my fellow Texans who made fun of me every time I said water. And then I would ask her, what do you call that thing? And she would call it a piano. And she made fun of me. Anyway, okay. Best thing about living in Texas is nobody makes fun of New Jersey. Everybody made fun of New Jersey over here. And the reason Texans don't make fun of New Jersey is because most Texans couldn't find it on a map. So it's not that they're nicer. It's just like I grew up in New Jersey. Do you remember when you went to New York City and the moment the other one changed to green, they started beeping their horns? It was horrendous. Beep! I think it's illegal now. Beep, beep. And then I went to Houston 35 years ago and nobody beeped their horn. And I said to someone, they're nicer than we are. And they said, no, no, no. The reason you don't beep your horn is they might get out, go to the back of their pickup truck, take out their gun and shoot you. So anyway, okay. Now, look at this. They're both full. Let's say I took the 24 ounces and poured it into here. It would say, stop, stop, you're overfilling me, right? In heaven, I believe we will have as much glory as we can hold. I think that's what Dante is saying. That the degree of beatific vision that we are able to participate in will be according to our worth, which is not works righteousness. It is how well we are ready to do that. I'll give you back your Stanley. There we go. That's pretty big. You're gonna get big arms there. You better watch out. You're gonna get too much arm muscle here. You have to go back and forth. Anyway, so this is, again, important to understand that we're not all meant to be on the same rung of the ladder. We have different callings and we prepare ourselves differently to receive as much of God's glory as we can, right? Otherwise, you're telling me that a kid who's like very autistic is going to have less of God than a PhD and a THD? No, they're going to be as full as they can be when God's grace. And anyway, I do think heaven is a pretty dynamic place anyway, so I don't know if it's going to change. We don't know that much. You know why? We're so desperate to know more about heaven that even though every single one of Jesus's parables is fictional, we insist that the rich man and Lazarus must be true because we really want to know about the afterlife, right? But other than the name Lazarus, it's a parable like anything else. It's probably not, quote, true in terms of history. Okay, now, let's go back to this idea of standards. What will our standard be as we seek to grow in God's grace and wisdom and grow towards the beatific vision? Again, what is our standard? Is it modern standards that are relativistic and always changing? Or is it the good, the true, and the beautiful? Let me show you something here. Do we have any of our new trad wives here? We have any trad wives here? It's like a growing kid. That's what they call it. A trad wife. You bear that with pride, right? That's a traditional wife, right? As if it's a new idea. Okay. Now, what hurt the traditional wife? Housewife, what do you want? Homemaker, what do you want to say? What hurt them? Okay. We all know that it was hurt by the people on the left, the feminists, the sexual revolution. But that's not the only thing that hurt the trad wife. There's something on the right that did it, and it's called capitalism. Now, I'm not against capitalism. It's lifted more people out of poverty than anything except the church. But the trouble with capitalism when it runs amok is that capitalism values everything by money, right? Look, I haven't heard this in a while, but if you go back 10 years ago, how many of you heard a version of this sermon on Mother's Day? A well-meaning Baptist guy gets up there and says to you, you know what, congregation? If you take all of the things that the housewife does and you figure out how much it would take to get someone to come to your house and do it, and you add it all up, it's like your wife is making $70,000 a year. Now, the guy who says that is well-meaning, but he has no idea that he is simply reinforcing the same old idea that something is only valuable if it brings in money. The best person on this, believe it or not, is Andrew Klavan, if you watch it. He's very, very good. I mean, I go on, what is that show called? Daily Wire, yeah. Look, I agree with Ben, I agree with Matt, but really, they're both jerks. Let's just be honest, okay? They're both jerks.
And then there's the Catholic dude who's just weird. Mike, what does it do? Just what? Andrew Clavin, of course I like him because he's bald, but if you want to listen to him, he is so good on husbands and wives and how important raising children is, and he does a great job, and that's why, thank God, again, I agree with Ben mostly, but Ben will say, well, you know, the economy has changed, and so we're going to have to abandon this entire village and throw everybody. And Andrew Clayton's like, no, okay? What is capitalism our God? Is the only way we can do things is by money and the dollar? That's part of the problem. We have forgotten the idea of how to value things. We are so messed up that if I got a little crew of my students and we went into a Walmart or something and we changed the price tags on everything radically, most people wouldn't even notice because we have no understanding of what value anything has anymore, and especially if it's intangible value. Again, if we are going to understand the beatific vision, we have to have a different measure and a different standard that we are moving towards. Now, let me tell you something else about the modern world. We often are too empirical. What does empiricism mean? That means everything is our five senses. If I can't see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it, then it doesn't exist. Now, I'm not against using our senses, but sometimes we over-rely on the senses, and that's why we need Plato to tell us often what we see with our mind's eye is more real than what we see with our physical eye. Watch out. You can't always trust your senses. We're not going into radical Cartesian doubt or something like that, okay? But we have to understand these things. And I believe that Jesus would sort of agree with this, right? Because, okay, Jesus spoke in parables, as I said a moment ago. What did we all learn in Sunday school? Jesus spoke in parables so that everybody would understand. How many of you remember the moment that you actually read the Bible and said, oh, that's not what the Bible says? They asked Jesus says, why do I speak in parables? So that only those who have ears to hear will hear, and those who have eyes to see what? He actually spoke in parables so everybody wouldn't understand him. Isn't that wild? And that verse comes from Isaiah 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. And God says to Isaiah, tell them, keep seeing but not understanding, keep listening but not hearing. Jesus, he might quote that more than any other verse in the Old Testament. We have to have eyes to see and ears to hear. C.S. Lewis in the book Miracles says, we say seeing is believing, but oftentimes believing is seeing. If you've ever read Miracles, which is one of his harder books, he says, I've only met one man who actually saw a ghost, but he didn't believe it because he refused to believe in ghosts. So it doesn't make a difference what you see. You'll never believe it, okay? You'll never, ever believe it. So we need to move beyond that. We need to train our senses and bring our senses in alignment with reality rather than forcing reality to fit our senses. Let me read you one more thing. Okay. Some of you may or may not know that in the Catholic West, Plato was lost for most of the Middle Ages, right? He was kept in the Eastern Greek East, right? But the Greek language was almost like, Augustine hated Greek. He didn't even learn it, right? And many of you probably know that for many years, the only dialogue of Plato that they had in the West was a Latin translation of, well, how many of you have seen The School of Athens by Raphael? Okay? By the way, if you ever go to the Vatican, make sure you get the long tour and not the short tour. The short tour will let you see the Sistine Chapel, but it won't take you to the Raphael frescoes. You have to see the Raphael. Make sure they're there, or you're going to be really angry when you get back. Because I speak at classical Christian schools all over the country, and you're not a classical Christian school unless you have a painting of the School of Athens. You know that? You might as well just close the doors, okay? School of Athens, you all know it. It's that famous thing where there's the stairs, and all the famous philosophers are there, and Plato and Aristotle are at the center, and Plato's pointing up, and Aristotle's like this, and Plato is made to look like who? Anybody know? Plato is made to look like Leonardo da Vinci, if you know that. Okay, now, Plato and Aristotle are each holding a book, the book that they were most represented by. Aristotle is holding a book that says ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics. That's where we learned that, a virtue is a mean between the extremes. Anybody know what book Plato's holding? Set up? It's the Timaeus. It says Timeo. So the Timaeus is the one book they had. And by the way, go back and read City of God. And unless I'm wrong, I went through that. And the only time Augustine actually quotes directly Plato, it is the Timaeus, every time. And now, he knew about it from other people, but that's the one, is Timaeus, okay? And by the way, I'm going to make fun of you now. We're all Americans. We're supposed to say Augustine, not Augustine, okay? I'm sorry, but that's the British way of saying it. And I said to the people at my school, listen, I'll agree to say Augustine if you call the first Christian emperor Constantine, okay? And then we'll go. So there's this beautiful place called St. Augustine, Florida. Everybody been to St. Augustine, Florida? Oldest city in the country. Our original founding fathers were Catholic, by the way. I don't know if you know that. St. Augustine is a whole lot older than Plymouth Rock. But anyway, okay. So in the Timaeus, this is what I believe. I believe that God purposely decided that the Timaeus would be the only because I think of all his dialogues, including the Republic, the Timaeus is actually the closest one to Genesis. Timaeus is the only ancient book to come within 1,000 miles of creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now, he doesn't say that, but he comes closer than any other book. He also has the highest view of the body in the Timaeus that he has anywhere else. Plato is still problematic. It's still soul trapped in body, but not in Timaeus. I want to read you this. It's a little bit complicated, but he is going to explain here why God gave us eyes and ears. And it's important to education. This is what he says in Timaeus. The cause and purpose of God's invention and gift of us to sight. Why did God give us eyes to see or sight? This is what he says. Was that we should see the revolutions of intelligence in the heavens and use their untroubled course to guide the troubled revolutions in our own understanding, which are akin to them. And so, by learning what they are and how to calculate them accurately according to their nature, correct the disorder of our revolutions by the standard of the invariability of those of God. That's a mouthful. Okay, they believed that all the planetary spheres were moved by an intelligence, an angel intelligence that moves the spheres. Pop quiz. Anybody know what angel Dante says controls our world? Quote angel. Give you a hint. It comes from Boethius. It's Dame Fortune. He says Dame Fortune. That's why everything's dying and decaying in our world, except in Texas, where we're God's country. All right. So, what is he getting at? The revolutions of the spheres. Okay, they believed that everything above the moon was perfect. Now, you would think, well, how can it be perfect if it's moving? But Aristotle said, if you move in a perfect circle, then you never decay. It's almost like you're standing still. That was very important for Aristotle. And you should know that even Galileo Galileo still thought that the orbits were perfectly circular, because that's what he believed. Was it Kepler who would know? I can't remember who it was. Who decided that Tycho Brahe discovered that they were elliptical. Then finally everything made sense. But they couldn't break. Elliptical was hard for them to fathom, because the idea of the circle is so important and so perfect. It's in Dante's Divine Comedy too. So it's always moving, and it's moved by the intelligence of the sphere. Anybody that's a fan of John Donne will know this imagery as well. So what happens is, through our sight, as we study the movement of the spheres, the whole point is to bring our own movements in alignment with the heavenly movements that are perfect. We don't make the heavens reflect us. We come into alignment with the heavens. Folks, real virtue, that's why we need classical Christian schools. I'm not against do's and don'ts. There are do's and don'ts in the Bible, but that should not be the center of virtue. In classical Christian education, the center of virtue is teaching your students to bring themselves into alignment with reality, with the movement of the cosmos, with the movement of the conscience God has given us. We are trying to bring ourselves into a right ordering. So, Augustine, we don't have disordered desires. Our revolutions have to come into sync. That's why God gave us eyes.
Then he finishes it by talking about the ears. He says, the same applies again to sound and hearing, which were given by the gods. You could just put in God because it's still true, to the same end and purpose. Speech was directed to just this end, to which it makes an outstanding contribution. An audible musical sound is given us for the sake of harmony, which has motions akin to the orbits in our soul, and which, as anyone maybe who makes intelligent use of the arts knows, is not to be used, as in commonly thought, to give irrational pleasure, but as a heaven-sent ally in reducing to order and harmony any disharmony in the revolutions within us. Rhythm, again, was given us from the same heavenly source to help us in the same way, for most of us lack measure and grace. With the exception of homeschool girls, most of us, have any homeschool girls here? They have grace. They are Jane Austen characters brought to life, okay? But most of the rest of us do not have harmony and grace. I mean, this is a homeschool girl. You're talking to her at dinner, and she drops her fork. Now, most people would just bend over and pick up the fork, but not a homeschooling girl trained in Jane Austen. She will continue to talk to you while she declines to the full, never losing eye contact. That's what's going to save the world, by the way. That's the beauty that will save the world. Grace and truth. Listen, seriously, folks, I know we're pretty far north, but do you still consider, is this the South? This is still the South, isn't it? Okay, still the South, okay? And what I'm going to tell you is true. Okay, after the Civil War, by the way, I spent half my life as a Yankee, half my life as a Southerner. The Yankees, okay, after the Civil War, we allowed ourselves to be colonized by a German school of education by a guy named Humboldt, and we allowed the research university to come in and crush us. And then the Yankees took that and forced it upon the South. The Southerners were still doing basically homeschool education, classical Christian, creating ladies and gentlemen, and that's why you need to get it back, because that's actually part of your tradition. And you know what? One of the terrible things about slavery we don't think about is that slavery was so evil that when they got rid of it, they felt like they had to get rid of everything else that was the South, and that was wrong. That's called throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There were lots of good things about the South that should have been retained and could have been retained, since very few people actually owned slaves, percentage-wise. And part of it was, you know that phrase when you used to send a girl to Switzerland to be finished? Okay? That meant grace and charm, knowing how to dance, even Baptists, knowing how to dance, knowing how to draw, knowing how to play the violin or play the piano. A girl that can't play the piano, she's not even allowed to get married. What the heck, okay? So, grace and charm. And God gave us eyes and ears so that we could bring ourselves into sync. That is why, if you read the Republic, Plato spends a lot of time on music. And you got to keep bad music away from kids. You know, when I was younger, I remember everybody was fighting against the terrible language in rap music. Not only the four-letter words, but the cops and rape. And I was glad they did that. But guess what, folks? The music is ugly too. The problem is not just the words. But again, you surround yourself with ugly music, you make ugly people. I personally think that one of the reasons that Vietnam got even more brutal than World War II is because of the music they were listening to, okay? That has an effect on us. And we need to be careful what we expose kids to, okay? They need to be exposed to music that orders and harmonizes the soul. And that doesn't mean there's no ugliness. You listen to a Bach, or you listen to Tchaikovsky, they use a lot of what are called discordant notes or atonal sounds, but it always comes within a package of greater beauty. It is resolved into it. That's why it sounds crazy now. But in the old days down south, did you ever meet like a grandma who had an artificial mole that she put on her face? You know what I'm talking about? That sounds crazy because a mole is a blemish. But the understanding was that the blemish actually made for greater beauty. It sounds a little weird to us now, but it is part of an understanding of beauty and balance and harmony. So this is why music is very important. And I'm going to give you a challenge. How many of you have ever said, why do my kids listen to this crap? You mean music, right? I always challenge parents that say that, and I say, when your kids were young and growing up, did you ever, even once, go put good music on the stereo and listen to it with them? No? If anything, you listen to what was on the radio. Now, I'm not against the radio, but if all you listen to is what is on the radio, then you obviously have no musical discernment. And if you listen, then your kid's going to listen to whatever their generation listened to on the radio. Again, I'm not against the radio, but you need to have some kind of discernment. Do you put music on and listen? In my family, when I grew up, we put classical music, but not just classical music. We listened to Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald, and at least in my house, we listened to Disney songs before they went bad. We listened to Broadway music. In my house, we listened to a lot of Celtic music. We enjoyed it. All this, you could give them classic rock music. I'm not saying it has to, but you need to model for them what beautiful music is and what it does to you, and not just completely abdicate all discernment to Madison Avenue. That's fashion, but basically to the people that make the music and tell you what to like and not what to like. Because it is hard to seek after the beatific vision and be like Plato when we're surrounded with ugliness. I noticed this when my kids were young. Look, when I was a kid, there were some cartoons that were a little bit violent, Tom and Jerry, but they weren't ugly. Do you notice how many cartoons that are actually ugly? Like, there's always liquids coming out of their nose. It's just grotesque. Why are we doing this? Why are we celebrating ugliness? Right? That doesn't mean we're snobs, okay? But we don't celebrate brokenness and fragmentation and ugliness, okay? We show charity towards it and we bring it in, right? But we don't worship it. We need to stop doing that. Here's my last point because it's getting late. All right. And by the way, after I speak, I will go out to the book table and sign any books you have. Make sure you come and make sure I sign your book. IVP has 5 books. I really grew up with IVP. In addition to the ones they mentioned, I have Passing the Torch, an apology for classical Christian education. So if you're into that. And then my new book that came out 2 weeks ago is called My Apologetics Dinner Party, a Real-Life Socratic Dialogue. And it is a book-length Socratic dialogue set during an international potluck dinner at Thanksgiving at my house. And I talk to all sorts of people. And it's almost like a screenplay going on. So again, make sure I sign it. But here's my last point. All right, what are we going to do to get beauty back, to get people back on track with the beatific vision? Obviously, we're going to do it with worship and with prayer. But we're also going to do it, I believe, with an education that returns to the great books. And again, I am more optimistic than most people because I speak for classical Christian schools all over the country, big cities, small cities, everything, small towns, everywhere, every denomination too. And wherever I go, it's the same joy. It's the same wonder. It's the same gratitude. It's that sense of, I'm part of this wonderful vision. The burnout is so much less for teachers at classical Christian schools than at regular public schools, or even just regular private Christian schools, because they recognize what they're doing. We need to get students back to reading the great books, starting with the Iliad and the Odyssey, because a reading and wrestling with the great books draws you in to a great conversation or dialogue that's been going on since Moses wrote the 5 books and Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and it makes its way right through Anselm at Anselm's house, and I joined them by Zoom, and it was a lot of fun, okay? Because by doing that, by reading these works of beauty, which doesn't mean there's not horror there, okay? But by reading these books, we are, again, aligning our soul with that which is good and true and beautiful. And we need to do it. And don't feel bad if, like me, you had a public education, didn't study this. It's never too late, folks. It's never too late to discuss these things around the dinner table with your kids. Do it now. There's no reason why you can't pick up the Odyssey and start reading it. Don't be intimidated, right? Plato, you could read Plato on your own. I mean, study a little bit, but again, just take your time. You don't have to go fast. The worst thing that ever happened in the 70s was speed reading, as if you're a better reader because you read fast. That's absolute nonsense, okay? Read at your own pace. And by the way, if you prefer books on tape, don't apologize. Listen to books on tape. Plato privileged the audible over the written. By the way, did you know that? And most people didn't until the modern period. So there's nothing wrong with listening to a book on tape if you are able to absorb things better through the ear than through the eye. That's fine. We actually overemphasize the eye and probably should emphasize our ear a little bit because Jesus more often says ears to hear than he says eyes to hear. Okay? It's about hearing the commands of God. So again, let us start here, ascending the rising path. Father God, I thank you so much for Matthew and all the people. Thank you for Emmanuel Church and all the people that have put together this important conference that we could study together and take joy in the beatific vision. Lord, I pray that the spirit we have here and tomorrow will continue through the summer and that the folks here and myself would be challenged to go back to these books, back to these spiritual disciplines, that you would fill us with a desire for you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. There we go. Woo. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you.